Testing. So I think we're close.
Yes. Others.
Okay, I think we're starting.
Nice crowd here.
It is. It turned out well, yeah. Do you know where you're sitting yet, so I can?
I'm just sitting right there
Cool.
next to
Okay.
Susan.
All right. Give a wave. Yeah, give a wave when I sit. Okay,
Keep her
great.
company.
Great. I think we're set.
I'll go warm up.
Cool. Okay. Thanks.
I had a microphone.
I saw a handheld one around somewhere.
Ladies and gentlemen, may I ask you to take your seats, please? We have the wonderful, knowledgeable Michael Eckhardt ready to talk to you about crossing the chasm. So, as we start to make our way to the seats, let me ask a quick question. Who here is involved with an innovative company? All right, that's every hand. Who here is in sales for their company? I should see every hand go up because everybody's in sales of some sort. So Michael, he spent his entire career understanding innovative companies, how they can grow, how they can understand their audience. And I'm quickly just going to say a few words about Silicon Valley Innovation Center. I was an employee at Silicon Valley Innovation Center, and they're involved with bringing folks from around the world, from Russia, from Brazil, from China, to Silicon Valley to meet with partners to understand trends going on in their industry, be it construction, be it biotechnology, to exchange that information. So this is a wonderful event where we can learn from an expert who has his MBA from Harvard in market analysis and new ventures, was a market-focused consulting director at HP, was one of the founders of the Chasm Institute, I believe, correct?
Yep, one of my partners is right there.
Where they've worked with companies you might have heard of, Cisco, Intel, IBM, Autodesk, SAP. He's been a keynote speaker at many, many conferences, and today he's going to talk to you about the chasm, what the chasm is, and how understanding it could help you grow your innovative company. So without further ado, please give a big round of applause to Michael Eckhardt.
Thank you, Christian.
You're welcome.
Sounds okay? You can hear me? Wonderful, great. Well, good. Thank you so much for coming this evening. Everybody's busy on a Tuesday night. You could be going home right now, and I'm honored to have you here for this topic that we're going to be hitting on for the next hour or so. Christian's already asked you a couple questions about who's in sales and so forth. In a few minutes, I'm going to ask you a very tricky question, which is, do you represent in your world, are you more focused on B2C or on B2B? And the reason that's tricky is for a lot of you, the end customer down the food chain is a consumer. It may be something we call a B2B2C, where you're selling to another enterprise, but that enterprise is selling to an end user. Got to understand the whole value chain, and we'll be getting into some of that as well. So I'm honored to be here, and I'm looking forward to working with you the next hour. The way we're going to run this is, and I'm hoping you already had a chance to get a little bit of snack food and a drink. We're going to do a session between now and 8 o'clock, so just about 55 minutes of kind of discussion, briefing, overview on some of the key things that are updated in the Crossing the Chasm book. And then right around 8 o'clock, maybe slightly thereafter, we'll start Q&A, some question and answer. Some people may need to leave at 8 o'clock. We understand that. That's fine. You've got other obligations. But we'll be here till 8:30 or even later doing some small group discussions as well. So excited to be here. Let me also introduce Mark Cavender. Mark Cavender is the other managing director at Chasm Institute. He and I have worked together for, I'll just say, more than 15 years. We'll leave it at that. We've worked with Jeffrey, who's our boss, Jeffrey Moore, for more than 15 years as well. And some of you may remember the first book, the first Crossing the Chasm book, which came out back in 1991. From the looks of it, most of you were in elementary school at that time, so I understand you might not have read the first one. And when that first book came out, there were lots of marketing books, lots of business books, and lots of good ones, whether it was from Michael Porter or other people. What this book did was pinpoint one specific problem point, and that was around technology companies not coming out with better cornflakes or better running shoes or better toothpaste. Those are all incremental innovations on Main Street in most cases. Although, what took them so long to come out with strawberry-flavored toothpaste, right? This was like 90 years before they finally got to that. But the point is, in technology, it's innovation every 3 to 5 years. And what the first book really focused on is how do you get into the main marketplace? You know, normal customers. Not the slightly odd early adopting visionaries who have already put in their order for the new Apple Watch as of this afternoon. Not available till 2015, but they still want to be on the list. Or they're running around with their Google Glass right now. That may be a very interesting group, but that's not mainstream. What we're going to be talking about is normal customers that you need to address at some point to get your venture partners, your investors, and others kind of happy with what you're doing. That's really the theme for what we're going to be covering here. And so I think each of you, when you think of who you are, thinking about your role, whether you're a technology expert or executive, whether you're an innovator in your company, whether you're a product professional. And by the way, if you are a product professional, one of the themes coming out of today is going to be, I hope you're what we call a whole product professional, not just a product professional. Turns out most normal customers don't care about your product. Ouch! That's like our baby photos. You don't like the baby photo of our kid? No, product is fine, but whole product, as we see, and it's one of the key themes out of this book, is whole product is the full solution, not just the product. This valley is fantastic at product, not so good at whole product. That's support, that's pre-sales, that's the migration path, that's the application software, that's the training, all those things required. You know, Apple does that fairly well. They put a lot of effort into whole product. We're going to be talking about one of the main 9 areas that we're going to see of either failure or point of success is whole product. And whole product with a W, not an H, like H-O-L-E product. That would mean you have a hole in your product. We don't mean to imply that at all. The work that we're going to be talking about is there's a whole series of books. Both Mark Cavender and I have been involved really in the majority of the books here, in either writing or editing a number of these. It looks incredibly planned, like, oh my God, every 5 years. It's not. It's not planned. It's whenever Chasm Institute and Jeffrey Moore and the team, when we think we've learned something new, we end up writing a book. And that's about every 3 to 5 years in the process. The book that you got today, and if you haven't, please pick one up on the way out, has all new examples in it. Basically, we've taken out all the old ones, the Silicon Graphics and others, because Stanford Business School and the engineering program at Michigan said, could you please put examples in this book that a 28-year-old or a 25-year-old would recognize? So there's Salesforce in there, and there's Box, and there's VMware, and there's a whole series of companies that you're well acquainted with. But we left one in. We left in the example that really gave birth to the whole idea. And you might have heard of this company, Documentum. And Documentum was a company that back in the early 90s had a wonderful problem that some of you have. We've got a product, and it can solve lots of problems. It can hit a lot of applications. That is wonderful news. It's also horrible news because now you don't know where to go. You do what we call, and you would never do that here in this room, I know that, but other people out there, we call it spray and pray. Spray and pray is going to market, and your strategy is anybody with a pulse, and $50,000, we consider that a customer. And we know that's not the right definition, but that's what the kind of the primordial pressure is to get us into those meetings. Some of those never close in terms of deals. And Documentum had document management software, and they had 73 possible applications they were looking at in architecture, in medicine, in FDA approval, which they eventually, and the Chasm process of scoring and rating and ranking, which wasn't really fully baked even at that time, we've made it a little bit better since then, took those 73 and brought it down to one specific segment for them to nail first. And that was a segment under pain, which I hope is what you're going after anyway. You need to have pain as the driver for any new acquisition or change in migration path or adoption. And it was FDA approval of new drugs, where the patent runs for X number of years, and the patent does not begin at launch of product into the marketplace. It begins when you're starting to protect the IP around it, which might be years before you go to market. So if you can get through FDA approval more quickly, by 6 months, you can increase $100 million on your bottom line. So that was the value proposition for Documentum. And people say, wasn't that kind of risky, going after one and not the other 72? And the CEO at the time of Documentum said, you know, the real risk would have been of us doing this spray and pray thing, going across the whole end gap of everything. Now, many of you represent large companies. We've got people from Cisco in the room, from Intel, from Fujitsu and others, and also startups. So we're going to try to speak to both groups. But let me ask that question right now, which is, how many people consider the world that they work in, that you were just in today, in your work world, as a B2B play? You're selling to other companies, enterprises, et cetera. Okay, that's about 2/3, okay? And then how about B2C, where consumer is kind of the, okay, that's about 1/3. That's interesting. Okay, neat. So Hot Chalk would be B2C, certainly, with a organization in between, of course. Yeah. Turns out everybody in B2B thinks B2C is easier, and vice versa too. They're all hard. And why? It's because in each case, we got to figure out, how do we gain success in specific areas that we need to hang and drive and win in first? And so every one of these companies, and we've taken a look at Chasm Institute, Mark Cavender and I and our team, at companies and figure out how, and we talk about both best practices, but there's also this rather unattractive discussion sometimes around what we call worst practices. And you know what's funny, and it's not so funny? It's a lot of people. What they really learn from is not just what to do, but also what not to do. And we've got a long list of companies. These are successful ones for the most, very high part, but even a great company like Amazon, what did they just announce yesterday? They kind of, either Jeff Bezos has an incredible plan, or their idea from going on that Fire smartphone, did you see the pricing change? From $199 to what? Yeah, 99 cents if you sign up for a two-year plan. Now, I'm not saying that's a bad idea, but I am saying that's a bad idea. First of all, you better take care of the customers that bought at $199, because they're not going to be happy, obviously, for having put real money down and now somebody else is getting it for free or for $1. But the real question is, Amazon has done brilliant work in commerce, e-commerce, in cloud storage with Amazon Web Services, but in the device area, and I'm not saying they should give up, but they got to be very careful about this. Is it possible that they're a little late to the smartphone game? Define little, right? A little. Like, yeah, we're going to talk about where the heck is this thing? Did you really expect me to carry two devices, or am I swapping out my Samsung or my HTC or my Apple device for the device coming from Amazon? Pretty unlikely for that to happen. Now, the test is going to be not just, is it going to be an expedient to them building their e-commerce platform? Because they don't really want to be a smartphone winner. They want to be an e-commerce winner and make it even easier. So we're going to talk about that. Apple had some very interesting announcements today. You saw them at 10 o'clock this morning on both the watch and larger size and the Apple iPhone 6 and so forth. But every one of these companies has a challenge. And that challenge is, nobody cares how well you did last year. Have you noticed this? It's what are you doing in the next 12 to 18 months to either improve your margins, raise your customer sat scores, build a more viral impact in the marketplace, generate revenues. Everything your stock price, if you're a public company, is based on is the discounted cash flow of future returns, not rearview mirror returns. Nobody cares about those. And so the pressure is on for each one of those. And every one of these has some interesting opportunities. I am so amazed and impressed with what Tesla's been able to do. And by the way, just because you're disrupting a marketplace does not mean you have to make it complicated. The car is complicated enough. Have you heard about how Tesla does their lease plan? Have you followed this? If you've leased a car lately, it's like you're buying a house. It's a thick document and you've got to wade through it and sign in 14 places. Tesla has simplified the lease process down as follows. First of all, it's 2 pages, not 30 or 50 or 70. They show it to you, so they would show it to Christian or to anybody else here in the room. They say, read it through. You don't need to sign it now. You get a chance later to approve it. You then get into your Tesla car. On the screen, the lease document shows up on the screen. It's only 2 pages. You've already read it. And it says, click here to accept. And if you accept it and click there, then you have permission then to start the car and drive it away. That's a little different than most lease processes that we have, which is almost like a court case of all sorts of legalese being thrown at you. So that one of the rules of thumb is, if you're going to come out with a solution that's disruptive, you better have all sorts of other things that are normally a pain in the neck for customers and make those simpler. So when we talk about a whole product, we're really going to be talking about something we define as MVP, or minimum viable, the simplified product, not the complexity one. That's basically a bad deal for most customers when we think of it. And so my work the last 15 years, Mark Cavander's work the last 15 years, has really been about just a couple key things. Let me just circle on here what Mark and I have both really worked on. It's really just this. It's a pretty narrow piece of the world. It's target market focus and target market success, predicting customer reaction to your new product intros. Oh, and let me mention something to you, because I think this may be clear to some of you and maybe to all of you. But you know, if there's a real buzz in the building because you're going through a launch process and there's a new customer segment you're going after and the engineers on your team are really freaking excited about the launch, be careful. It's probably highly disruptive. That's why they're excited about it. That may not be a good litmus test for whether it's ready for market in mainstream. Does that make sense? You met a lot of engineers that get excited about working on a battery project that goes, we're going to extend the life of our PC from 5 hours to 10 hours. Yawn, get the summer intern to work on it. Who cares? Most customers in the normal marketplace, that's a delighter for them, isn't it? So we've got to be very careful about whose pulse we're taking. Is it the markets? Is it the channels? Or is it our engineering teams? A little tricky at times. And then obviously this thing about profitable innovation. By the way, there's a myth right now that says large companies are not innovating. That is absolutely false. What is the case is large companies are not getting their innovations to market because there's a lot of issues going on with scorecard, motivation. It's too small a piece of the business right now. Why should we waste our time there when we have our mainstream? I see some smiles in the room. Those are all DNA processes and problems. So most companies are highly innovative that are large, whether it's an EMC or an HP or an IBM, but getting those things to market, pretty darn tough. And so what we're going to be talking about today, and really what fits in or fits out of kind of the scope of what the discussion is going to be, is as follows. You know, what types of products are going to be the topics for today? And the good news is there's some things that we're not going to focus on. Commodity consumer products or basic commoditized commercial goods. The Chasm process is really not important for that. There's other levers, other tools, and so forth. But these areas here in what we call dynamic, disruptive, highly competitive marketplaces, and by disruptive we're defining it as every 2 to 3 years there's a shift in the market. Going from on-premise to cloud-based, or going from internal combustion engine to electric-based, or going from 2D printing to 3D printing, all those things. Fundamental shifts. And so I think probably some of you see your lives here, whether it's on the software solution side, scientific precision instrumentation, SaaS and cloud, et cetera, that we have as examples. And so as we talk through the cases that we're going to be describing here, one of the questions you want to ask yourself is, are you the disruptor, meaning the one doing the disrupting, or are you the disrupted, or the E at the end as well? So a couple examples that when you think of on the enterprise side, Workday, who just had their public offering about a year and a half ago, I think it was, right? Just went public, versus an SAP they disrupted other markets, and now they're the ones getting disrupted. And the question is going to be, each one of these has to, i.e. cross, SAP has to go back and find new solutions that fit with the current frameworks and environments, not the old ones that they dominated for so long. And as you can probably tell, there's a nice long list of what you can call either victims or potential victims, as well as those on the victor side. still would love to be a fly in the room when Apple announced their first smartphone and the BlackBerry exec said, oh boy, that's a fad, that'll pass too. Who's ever going to live without a keyboard? That doesn't seem likely at all, right? The reality is every one of these is on the attack mode, and almost every one of these is either a defend mode or a find a new place to go mode. Like MySpace had to kind of reconfigure. They were early, but they weren't really in the place that allowed them to win. And so as we go through this, we're going to see that fundamentally, there's something we call the tech market model. And a number of you, if you've read our books, are familiar with the first part of the model. And that's what we call the TALC model, or the technology adoption lifecycle. That's the initial stages of when a company, at first, with a new category, whether it's ERP or customer relationship management or laser printing, when it first gets adopted by the marketplace. What we've built on to make it the tech market model overall, which incorporates this, is to say, you know, the real prize is Main Street, is to get to the market and then dominate it for a while. One of the bad habits that we saw in Silicon Valley is a lot of execs saying, wow, we got through tornado, now what? Let's go back and reinvent something new. Nothing wrong to do that, but man, you did this, now it's time to go to normal customers over here and really build what an IBM has been able to do on services, or what other companies have been able to do on their product and their solution side. And so the whole mix around it says there's really, we believe, 5 key outcomes of understanding that map better. Now, if we had time, we'd actually check with you and say, your product or solution or whole product today, where is it residing on this curve? In fact, one of the questions, and I'll throw that slide up, you're the advanced group, I think, right? So we can jump ahead a little bit, is the question that we like to pose to people is not a bad place to be, just a bad place to get stuck. It's like second grade's not all that bad, you just don't want to be there for 4 years. Okay, it's kind of that thinking, okay? So it's a normal stage, it's just, you need to move through it. Bowling alley, we'll describe the particulars on that. Tornado, which is everybody's dream in the valley here to say, let's go public when somebody's intending and believing that we're going to have a tornado, which is 45% or more growth rates, and then Main Street, which can last 5 years, 12 years, 15 years. And the question really is, where are you? And the coaching that we'd like to give our executive teams is, you don't get to fantasize about where you wish you were, or where your shareholders want you to be. It's where would the customers, who are your target audience, where would they place you on this curve, on this map? And so it turns out, and we're going to be quizzing you later on a couple examples out of the discussions here, but it turns out that it's not that easy to figure out. Why? Because it really depends, to a great degree, on a couple subtleties. And one of those is, who are we going after? What's the specific application? You can ask yourself some crazy questions, like well, let me just get to that page again. Where is enterprise storage on the adoption curve, on the tech market model? And the answer is, it's everywhere. It's way too broad. It's like saying, what's the meaning of life? It's kind of a broad question. Where's enterprise storage? Well, could it depend on whether it's for large banks and other financial institutions who are a little reluctant to go to the cloud because of security concerns, or for others where storage is already a mainstream activity, or for medical and health where there might be some regulatory issues getting in the way of true online or cloud storage. And so what we say is that fundamentally it's what kind of customer are we going after? Could this even vary depending on the geography implied? That the same product in the US could be in one life cycle stage, and in Japan or in China or in Hungary it might be another place? Is that possible? By the way, I'll give you a little hint. Whenever a consultant asks, is it possible? It usually is, okay, in case you're wondering. That's kind of how we roll, okay. But fundamentally, the question is then, where are we along this curve? And if we don't get the answer to that first, then everything we do is a little problematic because there's a different playbook for every one of these stages. And so it's a little unfair because we gave you the book in advance, but only a few minutes in advance, so most of you didn't read it, to talk about what these stages really are. But the reality is each one of these has a specific level of analytical kind of definition to it. And by the way, there's no bad stage, but I should mention early market does not mean that you're in a garage somewhere putting a solution together, and that's why you're in early market. You could be in a garage putting a solution together anywhere along here, but if you're in Tornado and putting a garage solution together, you're maybe 2 years or 5 years late. Does that make sense? So this is not about you. This is about where the market would place your solution, whether it's in higher education on the online side, whether it's on storage in the cloud for finance, whether it's new glass technology for energy conservation, whatever it may be. But once we know where we are, we can then decide what we both should and should not do. I'll give you a quick example. You're all familiar with the term price elasticity. There's a rectangle here. We could call it the rectangle of death, but we're not going to call it that. The rectangle of non-price elasticity is this. If you, in late early market, or Chasm, or early bowling alley, if somebody comes into a meeting and goes, it's been slow this quarter, let's take price down by 10%. Because, you know, price cuts always in what? Juice up revenue growth. If you're in this stage here, you will not change revenue or unit sales based on price change. Because here in this late early market in Chasm, and you'll see this in the book as well, is it's not about fear of price, although you got to have a normal price, a reasonable one, but it's about fear of change, fear of switch, fear of migration, lack of trust in your whole product. So how many of you drove here today in an electric vehicle of any sort? How many people drove here? Oh, it's all in one row. That's kind of cool. All right, great, all right. So what happens is, if you take the normal electric cars being sold at $25,000 to $30,000, the Teslas are double and triple that, but the normal cars, and you drop price by 10%, are the rest of you going to jump on the bandwagon and buy electric cars? Man, well, if Tesla took it down enough, I guess, but they still got to make a profit on their car too. And the short answer is no, is that a 10% change in price here will not do what you need. Now, as things move further through, a hybrid car, which is further to the right, like a Prius, for example, if that price elasticity, that does begin when we see that there. So how clear is that in your company that there are certain places where your price attack will not yield you any change in your business model at all? Is that real clear? Oh, by the way, I lied. It does change something. It screws up your margins because you all of a sudden have the same units at lower price, and now you got even less money to do market development and so forth with. So it's kind of an ugly thing we can try to avoid. But as we go through and describe, you know, who and why and what, there's a couple important elements that we want to mention. One is every one of these stages, decisions about what features to add in, what your channel strategy needs to be. Have you been in meetings where people go, we've decided to go direct, or we've decided to go with VARs, or we decided to go to the web? Yeah, guess what? Nobody gives a shit what you decide. This map, it doesn't give you all the answers, but if you're in the early market and you really think that VARs are the right strategy here, then you're mistaken. Because in the early market, the buyer wants a direct relationship with the vendor, with the true company. VARs are an incredible, powerful tool in the bowling alley when you're going after segments and focused markets. When you get to Main Street over here, the web is pretty powerful as long as it's not too complex an offer. Are we clear that just because we did that at our last company doesn't mean it's going to work this time if we're in a different stage of life around what we go after? And so as we think this through, every one of these, and it's covered in the book, every one of these stages has what we call a playbook around 9 specific decisions we have to have answers to. And those decisions, they're a list of 9 things. And if you've read marketing books before, you know about the 4 Ps. There's nothing wrong with the 4 Ps. What are the 4 Ps? Price, product, promotion, and place. They worked hard on place. Place is distribution or channel, but they had to get a P out of it, so they called it place. Those are all great, those 4. But I can tell you, if you're in the valley here, based on our experience over the events and the engagements we've worked on, have you noticed the 4 Ps does not mention who the heck the target customer is? Oh, that would be the 4 Cs or something else. I don't know, but all I know is that there's 9 things that if you're going to market and you've promised your venture investors money, that there's 9 areas that actually will drive the ability to actually commercialize your product. And each one of these 9, and both Mark Kavanagh and I spend a lot of time working with clients and saying, once you've figured out where you are, it's the same list of 9 things. You'll see them in the book as well. The difference is If you're in chasm crossing mode, it's a much more targeted approach to an application or a focused solution or a key segment. When you get to tornado, you can actually do a little more spray and pray. It's okay. I remember HP in the days of the LaserJet tornado back 15 years ago. And at some point in tornado, they wouldn't have known a customer if they stepped on one, but they know they sold 100,000 laser printers last month. That's okay in tornado, but in chasm crossing, it's not okay. Why? Because you're establishing the category for the first time. And let me just ask, these 9 areas here, whether it's target customer, whether it's what we call compelling reason to buy, but it's actually a little more complex than that. It's less compelling reason to buy and more, what's the compelling reason to switch from the old way to the new way? Isn't that really what we're getting at here? From internal combustion engine to a electric car, from on-premise software to cloud-based software, from normal printing to 3D printing, whatever it may be. And this part here is not about your product. This is about your category. Why should I switch to a cloud solution? And then if I switch in position messaging is why would I want to go with company X that I work for? It's really 2 questions. If you don't want a cloud solution, you're not going to want our cloud solution either. So it's really 2 steps along the buying process. And so what we do is we work on these 9 areas. Whole product rears its, ugly or beautiful head, whatever way you want to think about it, but the idea about what are all the key things needed. These partners and allies do not include your sales partners. This is all the people required to make your product whole. That could be application software, that could be a whole host of people to put technology in. Sales strategy is, how are you going to go to market? Direct sales force, etc. And as you go down that list, you notice pricing, who our most dangerous competitor is, positioning, messaging. Now, the world is not linear, and we all know that. But we get a lot of requests at Chasm to say, Michael, our company's struggling, and I think we have a positioning problem. We go, great, okay, well, we think we can help with that. We've got some tools, we think we can help with that. Let's have a meeting. But before the meeting, and Mark, you've had those discussions, and so have I, where you talk to the person on the phone, you go, but before you do the positioning messaging meeting and workshop for a day or 2 or whatever it's going to take, I'm sure you've done all the other work first. Like who you're targeting, why they want to switch, what your whole product is. And there's like a silence at the other end of the phone, and they go, well, those seem pretty hard. We thought we'd start with positioning. It's like, if we can't be clear on these first 2, you can do a lot of positioning that has absolutely nothing to do with who you're targeting. Does that make sense? So the sequence here, it's an iterative process, but we need to have clarity on these first 2 to 3 around the process. And at that point, then, we can be really clear on, basically, from a Chasm standpoint, how we're going to win in each one of those specific target places that we're going after. And most of you view disruptiveness or disruption as a positive because you're typically the company doing it to the other people. One of the questions that comes up a lot, and we have it both in the book, but we put it on the slide here too, is, so what's wrong with disruptive innovation? There's nothing wrong with it. It's just that only about 10% of your target audience actually is willing to accept it as a purely disruptive play. The other 90% would like the benefits, but they don't want the costs, the hassles, the risks, the inconveniences. The whole product's not there for them. The insurance policy's not there. Does this look familiar? High risk, unproven products and promises, incompatible and incomplete infrastructure, social resistance to change. But the irony is that there is a group of customers who actually, in the early market, aren't troubled by those things. So we go out and we get a couple deals early on, 1 or 2 or maybe even 3, and those people didn't need a whole product. I don't know what Eckhardt was talking about. It was 80% complete, and the customer worked with us on developing the application and providing the full support and all the things required. We call that in false positive over here, which means that's the early market reaction, but that's not your end goal. You take that 80% whole product with fundamental missing pieces over to the main marketplace, and you knock on their door, and they go, oh my God, how dare you come to a product discussion with me without having all the details worked out on migration to the new process? Can that happen, that we get a false positive here by the early adopters who then aren't representative of what the 80% of the market is or 90% over here? And we go, oh, needs have changed. No, they haven't. We're now in a different market segment. We're in a much more mature stage. And so those issues that you'll see in the Crossing the Chasm book are not just the high risk, but there's low data. No product history, no company track record, you're new, young, etc. No best practices to be put in place. And all those things cause this adoption curve to actually happen in the first place. And these early adopters, these only represent, from our experience, not as, we wish it was 50%. It was basically from 5 to 12% of the addressable audience is actually on the left-hand side. You going to make your numbers just selling to early adopters? You can have your exit strategy and your IPO and your forecast and your hockey stick numbers. No, we need to get to the normal marketplace over here. And a representation of each one of these types. And by the way, the photos are not incredibly accurate, but we can say typically the early adopters are individuals, not teams or not groups or not companies. Later, it's committees who are buying, and they're weighing in and vetting to see if it's ready for you to actually go after. But those early technology enthusiasts, they kind of sometimes look like this. They're willing to experiment. They might not have a long track record of consistent job employment because they've made some mistakes along the way, but they're willing to help. They have no money, but they're enthusiastic, and they want to help solve the problem. That's an early skunk works in a large company or in a small company, the startup engineering team, whoever that may be. That's the technology enthusiast. We know those people. We like those people. There's not enough of them on planet Earth. The next group, which is kind of an interesting one, is not the tech enthusiast. These are either business people or others who have a pretty clear sense, we call them the visionaries, and Steve Jobs, but it's a lot of people you sell to who say, I'm willing to take on some risk in engaging with you, not because I love your technology, but because I want to do a leapfrog breakthrough advantage that gives me a 2-year jump over my competitors in whatever game I'm in. Real estate development and office commercial buildings, medical applications, etc. They're willing to fund, they have big plans, and they're willing to put some people and money to solve that 80% whole product problem and bring it to 100%. So if you thought that was the fun part, you're probably right. Then the chasm occurs, and then reality sets in. Because this is where the 80% plus are of where really you're going to make your numbers. And these early and late pragmatists, the early majority, this group is a pretty tough group to sell to. And the reason is, and some of you have this right now, is you're not selling to an individual, you're selling to a committee. And there's the procurement people, there's the finance people, there's the line of business person who has the pain point, but they don't get the only vote. Do some of you have that kind of situation? Where it's multiple people and you've got to get each of them to line up and say yes before the purchase can occur. This group here, I'm not saying they're animals because we say they're willing to go with a herd. They want to go with a safe choice. So brand, large company versus small company, all the things that we didn't care as much about in the earlier stage when we talked about, gosh, these people over here actually didn't care that we're not a Fortune 100 tech company. But these people here go, who have you already sold to? Who are you partnered with? What's your track record? Oh, 16 months, great. And how long were you in that garage? That's not impressive over here. I'm doing work right now with a company in Chicago, and it's a neat company called Elevance Renewable Sciences. All the things that are petrochemical based today, they're doing in bio-based from soybean and from other kinds of biologicals. And it's based on Nobel Prize winning science. And what's interesting is they were boasting about the Nobel Prize winning science because this won awards over the last 3 years. And the early adopters thought, that is so awesome. I'm going to go at least do a pilot test using those new systems. But the Nobel Prize discussion, they had to cut that down because it scared these. If something won a Nobel Prize 18 months ago, it means it's still in the lab. It means it hasn't been proven. It means I don't want anything to do with it. Can you see how the whole communication chain shifts over here from what people over here vie and see and get attracted to in the first place? So the irony is a lot of these are very, very different sets of behaviors. But if there's one group in here that we care most about, and you'll see a lot of this written up in the book, it's about the pragmatists. And the reason for that is because this one group, the one we just talked about, who's tough to sell to, they represent two different life cycle stages for us. The first one is pragmatists are the first customers, normal customers, not the ones your parents warned you about, but normal people who are buying within an application or a segment or a specific use case. And when they buy in groups, then we know it's commercialized and gone across the chasm. Even Facebook. Do you remember that Facebook was an early market, of course, like every other solution set was, but at some point it went from just Harvard University to other universities, and to Texas and to Michigan and to other, and then it became what? Grandparents and uncles and aunts and totally uncool, and maybe that was a problem. The reality is Facebook didn't start in a tornado. It had to work its way through this bowling alley application segment. But these pragmatists, when they begin to buy en masse, and we call that tornado, and tornado is 45% growth rates, GR, growth rates. And I don't mean you went from 5 units sold to 8 units sold, and guess what, it was 40%. I mean, in the volume that you're expecting, you went from 40,000 units sold, or seats or licenses, to 70,000, and it's the whole category taking uplift. Both of these stages are based on when pragmatists decide it's okay to put your foot in the water, it's okay to jump in, it's okay to deploy. Isn't this kind of why there's conferences and trade shows, that people go to those? And there's a lot of talking for a lot of time, but nobody yet buys? And then at some point it's like, is it too early to go to the cloud? Yeah, Gartner says it's a little too early. This is a few years ago. And then this year you're going to be late if you don't move to the cloud. And then you go back to your office and you get the IT people a little fire lit on them and go, hey, guess what, we're going to be late. And then the company starts to move. But the reality is this group here determines, they're the key element of buying. And there's something here that we should mention. And what that is really the following. It's basically a wall. There's a wall here to get through the chasm, and we call that the whole product wall, or the whole product barrier. And it says you got away with an 80% whole product in the early market, but this wall is up that says if you don't have a whole solution, pre-sales, migration path, training, support, documentation, if needed, all the things required to make it a good customer experience. If you don't have those things, and you try to cross over, one of two things is going to happen. One is some crazy pragmatists buy by mistake, and you'll have escalations and problems and nightmares on weekends because they shouldn't have bought. Or more likely, your solution bounces off the wall and doesn't make it through. So one of my clients is a life sciences company, and they go, oh, I know what that wall is. Is that a semi-permeable membrane that allows certain molecules through and others it rejects? I thought, I guess so. Yeah, that's it. That's it. And that's the case. Now, I think half of you in the room today are at a juncture where you're taking either in a venture-backed company or a large company a new solution across into the main marketplace. And there's meetings right now in the development and engineering teams. And one of the questions is, we're not getting through here as quickly as we'd like to the main marketplace. What do we do? And almost every one of those teams is doing perhaps the same thing, which is they're asking themselves the question, what else can we add into the solution to make it even more compelling for the customer? Have you been in those meetings? The reality from our experience is that at least 3/4 of the time, it's not adding something in, it's what? Take something out, simplify it, streamline it, refine it. And that making it simpler will actually get you across. Because otherwise, you know what can happen? Is you go to your 5 or 10 or 100 customers who've already bought over here, and you keep going back to them and you ask them, so, what else would you like us to add to the product? Is that a problem? Is this your target audience as you seek to commercialize? No, it's not. You got to ask these people why they haven't bought, not ask these 5 or 10 or 100 why they have bought. Does that make sense? You're going to get some really weird-ass answers here that if you build them in, it's going to move you further left, not further right along the continuum. And so it turns out that this group around the chasm crossing, and in the valley here there's been some very interesting examples, and I'll come to some of those here in just a moment. Let me just pull some of those up. Yeah. If you think of what's gone on in the valley here, and let's put a picture up first. These are not in the place where I'm going to quiz you in a moment and ask you whether it's the Google driverless car, Tesla, expensive luxury electric car, music ecosystem that Apple really drove. Should Apple have been the one to do this? Remember Sony? Shouldn't they have been the one that go from analog to digital? Could not get across. They had the assets. They even owned record companies. Had good people there. Could not get that to happen. Apple did. And then Amazon and e-commerce. Remember in the old days when they were just a book? Hey, that was a pretty simple thing to sell early on. Just a book reseller. Now they're selling everything. Lawn furniture, cloud services, storage, diamond rings, you name it, we got it. But they didn't start with all that stuff. But each one of those, when we think about the innovation process of Tesla combining, visionary automotive engineering design skills with, breakthrough lithium-ion battery technology, or Amazon, some amazing things they've done under Jeff Bezos, or Google driverless cars, or Apple Music, just based on everything we've talked about the last 25 minutes, where would you draw the arrows about where these categories are today? For example, using streaming, downloadable music. Let's talk about North America, or US, not worldwide, because it may vary between India, US, Japan, Uganda, Uzbekistan, whatever. But the whole music ecosystem from Apple and its competitors, would you put that in bowling alley? Would you put that in Main Street? Would you put that in Tornado? Where would you put that as a category today for North America? Main Street. Somewhere here. We could debate it and want to get a little more specific, but somewhere in either thriving or more. Yeah, and it could be that there's some declining because of other competing digital streaming offers coming in, right? But it's somewhere sitting on Main Street. How about Amazon e-commerce? Is that declining? No, that's continuing to grow, along with all the other competitors that are sitting in the same place. Where would you put that? Would you put that in earlier Main Street? Yeah, I think thriving market is where we place it here. And by the way, this is an expandable time frame. This can be 5 to 15 years. So I know there's internet time, and a lot of that has to do with the earlier stages, but once you solidify here, Amazon is planning on dominating this for a while. This is not a one-shot wonder, 3 months and we're done kind of thing. How about Tesla and electric cars? Where would that be sitting on the adoption curve? Yeah. And it doesn't mean they're not selling. It just means it hasn't gone mainstream yet. And Chasm's not a bad place to be. It just means you're done with the early adopters to go, wow, I'm driving an electric vehicle and having to get to the main marketplace over here. And Tesla now on Highway 101 or 280, if you're driving around, you see 15 or 20 a day, right? Maybe more, right? Depending on what parking lot or where you hang out. But if you're on the East Coast, I know we know some people in Boston, they saw one in a month. So you got to remember, be careful who you hang out with because the valley here is not normal. But the reality is it's trying to cross the chasm and doing a pretty good job in getting to that. What's the biggest whole product element holding back the automotive electronic charging stations, right? And Tesla's working on that between LA and San Francisco, some supercharging high-speed stations, but it's still not. How about repairs, infrastructure, all the things that are a little bit tricky, not for those of you that live here, but for the normal customer over here. And then how about the Google driverless cars? Yeah, it's kind of somewhere over here, right? For sure. It's not ready to cross the chasm. And maybe, who knows, something else will take over and be faster and better when it's, incoming missiles delivering your Amazon delivery of whatever it might be through the drone program. But the fact is that driverless cars are still very much on early market side. One of the best things you can do when you go back to your management team and ask yourself the question, where are we? And you're going to go, this is the headache slide, by the way, which says it turns out there's actually 14 adoption stages. The Crossing the Chasm book focuses on this, which is really what we call 1C, 2, and 3A, 3B, which is really the commercialization process of getting the new solution across to normal customers. Over in the early market, lean startup and some other really good methods are good over here in 1A and 1B. Launch and learn, nothing wrong with 1A and 1B doing that. Those people are willing to accept it. But how about if you take a launch and learn philosophy and try to go to Main Street with it, or to mainstream marketplaces, it's going to be launch and burn, not launch and learn. It's going to be a pretty ugly thing because they're going to dare you to ever show up in their building again with a sales offer. Those areas there, when you think of the process, every one of those has its own, and we'll say very interesting, dynamic to it. And we can at 8 o'clock take a few questions on these as well. But across the board, what we've seen are patterns, really 8 key patterns in what each one of these brings to life. One of my favorite ones, have you seen this movie before? Initial excitement by visionary customers. And somehow it's like, wow, what happened? That didn't continue. Yeah, well, the customer type changed as you went further right. And these people over here aren't going to be your excited visionaries anymore. They're going to say, show me the ROI calculator that tells me how I can get an 18-month return on this investment. They go, ROI calculator? These guys didn't want that over here. I know, that's why they're early market people. And then one of my favorite areas is what we call bowling alley, in really getting across the chasm. And notice what I put here. This is a pretty controversial thing. It says, in the bowling alley, highly focused demand, only 15% of sales reps, at best, are actually able to sell here. How can that be? You got a good sales team? 5 or 10 or 2,000 people? What kind of selling takes place here? Is this transactional selling? This is solution selling or consultative selling. One of the biggest mistakes we see people make is taking their amazing mainstream sales force, which is highly transactional, and taking the people that make the most surpassing of quota on that business over there and say, come on over here, we got a new business for you to work on. And you bring them back into a consultative sales model, and in many cases, what happens? You screwed it up on 2 ends. One is you lost your talent over here who are really good at managing the relationship with the major streamlined businesses over here, and they don't have the skills to do the consultative selling, solution selling over here. Right. And to Christian's point, yeah. And by the way, we're going to see that this is not about good or bad. It just says that in this early bowling alley pin, we typically see that 85% of sales are generated by less than 15% of your sales team. So I got a question for you. Why did we train all 500 people in the sales force about this new breakthrough solution when in fact only 10% or 15% of the people? We just wasted some money. So what we recommend at Chasm is do some awareness training for everybody on the new solution, but then triple down on the training for the tiger team that really has to go in there and win in the certain segments, solution-wise, consultative size-wise, and so forth. And that really drives a much better set of solution sets. Am I making this up, or does that feel like that might fit with some of your experiences around the sales team and the sales force and what allows you to win or not in the process? And then lastly, another one I'll circle here is when you're on Main Street, you know you're on Main Street when 70 to 90% of what you have are upgrades, repurchase, etc., to existing customers. They might be switching brands from a Dell laptop to an HP laptop, but it's still the same category. They're not switching types or something else along the way. Where would you put the new Apple watch that comes in 3 different flavors with 17 different armband choices and several different applications possible? Where would you put the Apple Watch on this? Yeah, Pauline says further left. Would you put it somewhere in? We'd have to examine it a little bit carefully, but is it here or do you think it's already across? Yeah, it's probably over here. Apple has the skills, and by the way, a test as to whether you're in bowling alley or not. One really good test is, can you find a group of normal customers, not the early adopters, but normal people who can no longer imagine life without the solution in place? Now, for fitness enthusiasts and others who are using other kinds of personal wearable computing, or the Apple device, which is also going to be for fitness and wellness as well, we might see that as being an interesting vertical that begins with it here, way before it becomes a fashion statement among people in other vectors, other segments, and so forth. And so to summarize this, one of the key elements that we've seen that really drives a lot of the chasm crossing is the idea and the discipline required to do what we call identify and attack a beachhead segment. Does this, if we're sitting here with whatever B2B or B2C solution we have, does this sound familiar? We've got 80% of many solutions, but we have 100% of none. That means we don't have the full, tidy, clean, deployable solution for any vertical or any segment, but we got an almost solution for many different people. That almost works well over here. It's oil and vinegar over here. It's not going to match up. And so as we think this through, from a B2B standpoint, the correct focus, and you'll see in the book it says focus on a single beachhead. I've got a little secret for you. It's okay to go after a couple. But if we said it's okay in the book to go after 2 or 3, then you go, oh, we're pretty good. We're going to go after 9. And then you'd be spraying and praying again and doing all the stuff that we don't recommend you do. And so every one of these, whether it's Google driverless cars, Apple Music years ago, Tesla today, Amazon e-commerce 10 years ago, each one had to make its way across. And there's a special element that I should mention that says in B2B, it is absolutely these 11 areas that matter, but it also matters in B2C. But there's something you'll see in the new book towards the end that we have as kind of a chapter and a discussion point. And let me just show you a couple quick examples as we pull this together in the last 5 or 6 minutes. You know, are we in a complex B2B business? Workday at the enterprise size, Salesforce, SAP, Oracle, selling to large enterprises or mid-sized ones? Or is it a digital computer? But each one of these 4, they still have to answer the same questions. And those same questions, and we'll be happy to send you the deck later so you can look at them and not strain your eyes, but it says, if you think you're going to win in the markets in which you're serving or attacking today, and if you take, well, those key elements that we just talked about, all 9 of those, and turn those into a form of a question, we haven't changed anything on you here, it's the same 9, and it says target customer, what's the specific profile of the target customer that will drive the majority of our next 6 to 12 months sales in this category? And if your answer is SMB or FSI, FSI is financial services and insurance, it's some vast, huge industry, or SMB, small, you think you're focused? Have you ever met anybody in a meeting who goes, hi, I'm an SMB? SOB maybe, but not SMB, right? And so the reality is here, this comes later, but in bowling alley plays, your chasm crossing, it's got to be a little bit more specific and granular than that. And if we can answer each one of these 9 questions, including elements that hit on some pretty germane issues, which are, does our core combination of product and key enablers meet the customer's minimum expectations that solves their pain point to cause them to want to switch? And then are the partners and allies in place? And we have a 90-10 kind of a deal on this. And the 90-10 is as follows, is that we all know that a little bit of luck and good timing doesn't hurt in any new enterprise, but if you can answer these 9 questions specifically for your enterprise, for your venture, for your initiative that you're going after, then you're 90% of the way there, and then you're relying 10% on luck, timing, happenstance, etc. If you're going in with your eyes half closed and we don't take the time to answer these questions, then you got 10% of the way along and you're living off of 90% luck. And you can do that, but you got to be really lucky, and you should probably be in Vegas and not somewhere else if you think you're going to be that lucky. So the reality is there's a lot of hard work and heavy lifting behind a B2B or a B2C. But the reason I single this out is to wrap this up, and you'll see it in the last chapter of the Chasm book that you got today, is for the B2C piece, there's something we call the 4 gears that I think helps say, not just do we have our 9 points in place, but there's really 4 key, what we'll call them tipping points for getting a B2C category winner to emerge. And we call those the performance gear, the power gear, performance gear and power gear. So you can see that they're basically 2 different kinds at verticals to each other. And let me just get the motor started on this and show you what we're describing. It's both acquire, have you heard these verbs before? We need to acquire customers. We need to engage with customers. That's different. Acquire is, can we bring them in? Engage is, can we keep them active with us? How many site visits per month do we have with them? Is it a half a millisecond, or is it 20 minutes a week, or what is it? Can we convert them? Convert them, monetize them, cause some revenue stream, advertising, per click, whatever it may be. And then finally, can we enlist them to help us go further? That they're actually going to be our marketing arm and create the virality that we see. And so each one of these 4 is a key gear in the process for B2C. And ultimately, we'll talk about virality, retention, and churn in a minute, but it really says that, you know, of these 4, we've got a chance if we just acquire, that's not good enough. We got to engage. We got to convert, get some kind of monetization out of this, or else our venture backers are not going to be happy. And then finally, enlist the whole crowd and virality and group going there. And the ideal world for you, if you're in B2C, is to have this cranking in a way that really generates that tornado. And you know, the graphics are horrible, but you get the idea. And what we'll say is that acquire, we can measure that by the rate of gaining new users, whether it's an online system for education or for managing software solution security and so forth. Engage is how long? What's the frequency of user engagement? How often do they come back to us? Convert, what's the percentage of total users that participate in the business model? I mean, they're actually paying. LinkedIn is, by the way, a great example of this, where they've actually been able to both, what? Engage, convert, enlist. And it's 295 million users now on LinkedIn, just below 300 million, and a pretty powerful set of people that are creating a very high level of virality and a very low level of churn. And so one of our experiences is we have the lowest gear or the slowest gear theory that says before tornado, at any point, one of your gears is going the slowest, whether it's the convert, whether it's the enlist, whether it's the engage. Focus on that one for the quarter and really make it drive into the rest of the business model that you need. And so as we pull this together in the closing minutes, and to say whether you're B2B or B2C, there's two fundamentals that I hope you find the book useful and instructive about. And by the way, it's a pretty easy read. If you're on a long plane trip, you can finish this book. We've had some other books that are not as easy to read. This one kind of flows. So it's, you know, it's the one that's the easiest to read. But not dumbed down, but just it has a natural cadence and a natural cycle of examples and so forth in there. And what you're really going to find is that the fundamentals of what it takes to win, and some of you have been already very successful in the work that you have done, and the question just how do you move forward, is where are we today? What stage are we in? How do we really address those questions around those 11 key areas that we were describing? Can we answer those questions? And by the way, what I should mention is if the answer resides in the executive or CEO and not in the base business, what happens if marketing, sales, and engineering all have their own questions to these 9 questions, their own answers? You have a siloed, chaotic state. We need to get the multifunction cross answers to these that says, the target customer, if marketing and sales have very different views about who they're going after, then somebody's right and somebody's wrong, or they're both wrong, but they can't both be right. And so we have the whole analysis of how we move and how we move forward behind that system. And then lastly, I would never dare give you, because you're all very busy, I would never dare give you a homework assignment, but I will. In conclusion, thinking about the next 45 days and what you as a team and organization can do, just grabbing a couple of these books and reading them and applying, not all of it, but parts of it. The first one is the where question, is gain agreement in your organization about where you are today. This is a nice question to ask that too often we speed by that and go, what's the forecast? Right? What's our margin going to be next year? First ask, where are we on the map? How far along is the category? And then secondly, analyze your current strategies, your category strategies, your field, your channel, and see what are we doing. Are we using price too much as a weapon here, which is antithetical to the playbook for chasm crossing? Or are we doing too much disruption over here on Main Street to kind of antagonize our mainstream install base customers? And then lastly, and probably most importantly, build a plan that you believe can really drive the next 6 months, 12 months, and so forth of your success down the road. And I think the book does a pretty good job of kind of laying that out. When I did this session at a company here in the Valley, and the name shall remain nameless, and you'll know why in a minute, at the end of the 2-day workshop, one of the product management directors stood up and said, this makes so much sense. I just don't have time to work on this. I'm so busy. And the VP was in the room and said, Ben, this is actually called your job. Answering emails and answering voicemails and going to meetings, those are all foundational, but the output is we got to come up with a strategy. And that's really what this is. And so ultimately at the bottom, at the end of the day, at the end of the week, it's can we as a team and an organization get our cross-functional groups to really agree on what it is that we're trying to do, and win with a unified view of the plan. And by the way, if it's a 500-page plan, surrender now. I'd say something like a 10 to 15 slide strategy is about all an organization can really do to be able to repeat it, apply it, agree on it, and so forth. So that's the hour of kind of throwing a lot of stuff at you. I hope this was useful. We'll take a Q&A here in a moment as well, but I wanted to thank you for all your good works and all your good attention, and I hope some of this was relevant to the challenges that you have in front of you. So thanks very much. Thank you. Thanks.
Oh, that was absolutely amazing. Who learned at least 15 things tonight? And so
I did. I did.
I'm happy that you could learn something.
No, I learn every day.
So I'm going to pass around questions. So who's got questions in the audience? Gentleman in the back. 1 second. I'll come by. And we've only got one microphone, so I'll ask you let the question, and then I'm going to take it away so there's no follow-up question. Then the other people can think about the ones that they want to have.
Okay, great.
Hi. I didn't see those 9 questions in the book, and I was looking for it. So how do I get a copy of these slides?
We will email that to you. Yep.
That was a great example of a succinctly asked question, by the way.
Right. So what we have is, nicely enough from the SVIC, we have email addresses. So we will, for anybody who requests it, or we can just send it out to you, this slide deck that'll have that guidance in there. So absolutely. What these are some of the tool sets that may not be in the book, because the book is as much descriptive as it is prescriptive. So some of this will help supplement some of that. So great, thanks.
So you mentioned back in the early stages where to reduce your price, does the corollary hold where you should maybe consider raising your price?
Wow.
You're not going to increase the customer base?
You know what? That's a really interesting question. So let's jump to that page right now. So the question was, it was a little hard to hear, I think, because the mic's not totally tuned up, but the question we were saying is that if the corollary is maybe reducing price is a bad idea, can you actually gently have a higher? And the answer is, since we're going after pain points here, if they're really a true mission-critical pain point, then a slightly higher price is not going to scare them away if it allows you to embody a fuller whole product. So what we'll say here is that there's too many execs, and we've seen good people who, in Tornado, in their last company, they took price down by 5 or 10%, and they doubled revenues, and now they go to their new company, and they go, hey, you know what worked last time? Too bad. The category last time was in Tornado. The new category in the new company is in Chasm Crossing, different rules of the game. Does that make sense? And so a slightly higher price here is not a bad thing at all. Oh, by the way, one thing we should mention, and I hear this a lot in meetings, is we know these people have a pain over here, but they don't know it. We're here to try to educate them about their pain. Go find a different segment. The elements of education, is that quick, fast, and cheap? Yeah, if you can't find a true burning platform here, then it's going to be a much longer chasm crossing than you'll ever wish. So yes, price, maybe the corollary of a little higher price would not be a bad thing at all. Yeah. Any other couple? I think...
Oops, sorry about that.
How do you recognize the, where we are in, like, the chasm, the early stage people, how do you recognize it?
The best way to do this, the consultant's answer is we can do a workshop for you and help you figure it out with our help. You can probably do it in some cases on your own as you read the book. Whichever chapter your life starts flashing before your eyes and go, that's where we are right now, that may tell you something. Right? Where the sales force is demotivated because we haven't made our numbers this quarter and the management. So the book will answer some of those questions. If you still have some, send me an email. I'll be happy to go a little deeper into it. I think Arthi had a question here. Yep.
I'm very interested about this whole concept of MVP, and when you think about a B2B2C model, you're still thinking of an enterprise model in the B2B world as gatekeepers selling to enterprises, but you are building for the end user using lean testing.
Right.
And sometimes lean testing is not very sales friendly.
Good point. So examples of a B2B2C is if you're selling to Verizon, it's an enterprise sale, but they're only buying from you because there's some impact further down the food chain with the end customer, and exactly for the financial example too of Intuit and others as well. So yes, so the idea about MVP, ultimately the complexity that has to be worked out of it is really from the consumer's or customer's end, not from the intermediary's end, because they might be willing to live with some of the complexity that the end customer's not. So that's a pretty important point on the design side. Yep. A couple other questions?
Where do you see the Chasm Institute on this life cycle adoption?
Oh, man. Tough question. Management consulting has been on Main Street for the last 45 or 50 years. The classic model, and there's some great companies out there doing it, do 5-month, 6-month, 12-month projects. We think we're probably in bowling alley, even after 10 or 15 years, which is very specific to one area, which is only tech, and really not doing long-term engagements, but our typical things are 2-day workshops, and then a series of those that might end up over a couple months, and then we're done. So we try not to glom onto the client. So the short answer is our model's not the classical one over here. It's a little bit of only do what the client wants and not a bit more. If we were going to go into retailing and into aerospace and others, we'd be past, but we're not. Tech is really the heart and soul of what we do for a living, so I guess we're still in bowling alley.
I suppose one question I have is, so we did the homework assignment, we found where we are, we answered the 9 questions, and now we realize, shoot, the things that we've been doing the last couple of months, couple of years, maybe not be correct. How do you go back to your investors and say, hey, Bob, want to talk to you quickly about something?
Right, yeah, just in the hallway. Well, I wouldn't have had an answer for you until about a year and a half ago when a new word came up in Silicon Valley, which is not we're throwing out our old strategy and doing a new one. We're doing a pivot. Have you heard of the pivot? What an elegant word for, oops, we didn't get it quite right. We're going to pivot. I love that phrase. It's a wonderful verb. All kidding aside, what we can say is that the earlier we can recognize we're on the wrong path, the faster failure is better. And so investors don't want to hear that, but pretending that it's still going to ramp when it's not is a much uglier tale to tell later on. So yeah, so I'd say pivot.
So we have a business right now that's in a situation where I think we have kind of 3 different customer segments, small and medium business segment, kind of a traditional enterprise segment, and then a sort of call it an API segment, a segment that wants to get access to the product but wants to get it via API and has a different set. So 3 different segments with different sets of needs.
Yep.
And we're kind of pushing them all across the chasm together and dedicating a certain number of resources to each.
Right.
And I'm just curious if obviously in your role you've probably faced that before where people are trying to do that. We've had strategic discussions about should we just focus on one and get it across and totally ignore the others, or should we continue to try to push all 3 across at the same time? Right. And how do you think about that generically? Or do you...
If you had unlimited resources, you could do the 3. The reality is every company from IBM to Microsoft, they've proven that just with money doesn't mean you cross the chasm on things, right? Because Microsoft's an amazing company with great people. Is that I think your attention span and your engineering team can you find one of those 3 application areas, both the API one or another, that has the greater pain point where you might put 60 or 70% of your assets and do some early experimentation on the others, but try to complete the whole product for the one first. Our experience is doing 3 things at once in a company of, is this 100 people or 50 people or 200 people? That's an awful lot to ask of that. So the short answer is at least prioritize them and say what's the primary one that we're going to put the next 12 months effort into. Is there a possibility that one of these might actually have a positive effect on the others if you start winning in one of those? Is there some kind of a viral or adjacency effect, or are they pretty distinct in their buying process?
We're winning mostly in the energy. The biggest success has been in the small medium.
Okay.
It's not at all referenceable to either of the other 2.
Right.
Probably if we won in either of the other 2, it would.
Right.
With the API would probably affect the enterprise would affect the API.
Got it. Okay. Because SMB does not refer to enterprise and vice versa. It just doesn't do it. By the way, if you read last week, even Google with unlimited seemingly resources, they had the Google Enterprise efforts. Did you see last week they rebranded it to Google at Work? And the hint is enterprise isn't ready for Google in the same way that they believe the SMB or the small to medium-sized business is. So they're actually recalibrating now and saying it turns out that you can have a large appetite, and even if you're Google, you can try a lot of different things, but at the end of the day, you got to focus on something first. And SMB is probably where the higher pain point is of the normal old way of legacy enterprise documentation. So, yeah.
Just sort of following up on his question about pricing. In the early market and in the chasm, you mentioned that raising the price might be a good idea. What do you do to justify that? Do you sort of do you do what you sort of told us to avoid earlier, which is, add a bunch more features in there? I mean,
Right.
how do you sort of play that, especially if there's potentially other competitors? Early market, but you have competitors who are
Right.
bidding for that business.
Yeah, great question. So part of what you're getting at is there was a myth. It's a myth that's still around. It says first mover advantage. The first one in is always the one that wins. If that was the case, then Creative Labs would be the music digital player winner in the world with a Rio and not Apple with their 15th or 16th out of the box. What we can say is on the pricing side is that fundamentally the question is going to be what's the minimum viable product, meaning also the least costly initiative for them financially to go into. So is there a way to scale back where people can get some application solution sets first and then migrate those into others? Reason I say that is, in most cases, name the last large enterprise software company here in the Valley who has taken an entire portfolio of products across all at the same time. Just doesn't happen. It looks like that later in hindsight, but it wasn't. It's actually over here that they're building a portfolio piece. So pricing has a huge issue in this. Is this on the software side you were asking the question? Yeah. So to me, it's not adding in. It's actually buffering, maybe refining, maybe not dumbing down, but simplifying. And the question is then going to be, how can we make the pricing versus competitors? You might even win at the same price or a higher price if you have the whole product. So there's about 20 pages in the book that do a fairly good job of hitting the pricing question, and I think those might address some of your questions on that too. So, great point. Let's take a couple more, and then we'll wrap up. Any other thoughts, questions, et cetera?
Michael, just a quick one. So, in terms of false positive, I wanted to ask you, what are some ways to prove false positive and to market false positive? Because no one really wants to hear that, right? It's kind of a doggy downer. And
you mean within the company?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's a tricky one because every new venture at some point is born in the early market among visionaries, and not just customer visionaries, but the engineers of the visionaries on this as well. The test we have is the people that we're talking to shouldn't be the ones that we're talking to 2 years ago, because they're providing us with the track record to date, but not the future. And so one of the rules we have is of any 10 customers we meet in the coming 6 months, 6 or more have to be prospects and not current customers asking for additional things. Because otherwise we're going to self-reinforce back to the left-hand side. So like a 60 or 70% rule that says, wait a minute, we like talking to people that like us already and are buying from us already and want to buy more. I'd say that should be 1/3 of our effort in our discussions, our focus groups, our interviews. 2/3 should be the people that either dislike us, hate us, or just haven't bought from us yet at all, or have never even heard of us before. So that would be the right-hand side. Because the false positive is a disease in the valley here, right? It's like, wow, we met 3 people. They're not normal, but they love our product. And we're going to now scale it by Q4 into a $100,000, per person license fee, and it's not going to happen. So, yeah.
I'm very curious, when you are on the main street, and
Yeah.
then how to understand that you start going down, like other symptoms to understand when you don't feel it yet, but it starts happening.
Yeah, okay. You've all heard the story about the frog and the boiling water, and at some point the frog realizes it's getting hot in here, but it's too late to get out. We call this, it's a verb, and you really don't want to have your company named after a verb. And I'm going to give you full respect for this company, but still, getting Kodak'd means knowing 5 or 10 or 15 years beforehand, you knew what was going to happen, and you could not alter your course. And the sad part is, great people, everybody in this room with a smartphone, at least 10% of the IP in your smartphone is Kodak patent invention. If they could have gotten some level of fuller monetization, they sold those at fire sale prices. Even Apple has some Kodak IP in their products. And so the point is that as you're getting into mature markets over here, if you want to take the most extreme case we've ever had from a mainstream customer was we got a call, or actually an email 9 months ago from Swiss Post. Swiss Post is a large Swiss postal organization, like we have the USPTO. They've been around since 1849. That's a long Main Street. And now what's happening is first-class mail is degrading, and people are doing electronic messaging or other ways, social enterprise messaging, and so they're seeing themselves go down, and now they got to go back and renew back to newer market cycles and stages. And at some point, the danger is if you wait too long, you don't have the money left, you don't have the people left, you don't have the talent left to actually do that. So I wouldn't wait till what we call 5C. I would do that in 5B, and we call that renewal back to an earlier life cycle stage, like a like Toyota did with electric or hybrid cars. That'd be a renewal strategy going back.
Well, I've got one last question for you because we're going to wrap up, and I believe you could be available afterwards
I'll hang out here a
to
little
sign
longer.
additional
Of course.
books
Be happy to.
and talk up there. So the question I have is, could you give a case of one of the client projects you've had that have made you the most proud?
Wow, okay. Yeah, we worked with a company that was at one point part of Agilent, and this is public information or else I wouldn't be sharing it, and it was the automated defibrillators. Do you know what those are? For people that are having a cardiac arrest. And it was moved over to Philips Healthcare. And do you notice now, like in airports and all that, every 300 meters and in health clubs, et cetera, their vision at Philips 15 years ago was we want a automated external defibrillator, AED, in the same place where your fire extinguisher is. That was the vision. It's really easy to get your vision confused with your near-term strategy. So we went through this and said, hey, for $3,000 each back in 15 years ago, how do you get those automated external defibrillators to get in the main market? So they looked at 15 possible segments. 15 possible segments here, and they chose one. A little bit like the documenting example we talked about earlier. One of the segments was rich guys over 50 on yachts. A little more detail than that, but you get the idea. We did a scenario around each one. And by the way, that's a horrible segment. If you're the rich guy over 50 on a yacht, do you want this as a gift from someone else? Would be like a housewarming gift, or I love you? Plus, there's a lot of issues with it. If you don't do it right, you go into permanent comatose state, which is probably worse than anything. So we did 15 segments, and it turned out that the one was the U.S. airline business, United, American, and Delta, where we know that they love you. You know airlines love you, but beyond that, they're very inconvenienced that if somebody on a plane has a serious medical emergency, like cardiac arrest, the rules by the FAA is you have to, within 30 minutes, land at the nearest airport. Because you want to save a life, obviously, right? And so the airlines would have to do two things. One is divert and inconvenience the other 200 people on the plane, which is a problem. And two is dump all their fuel, $50,000 worth of fuel. There's environmental problems, there's cost problems, etc. By having these AEDs on board and training the flight attendants how to use them, you could save the life, but also not divert the flight. Does that sound like a point of pain for an industry or an organization? So that's where it started, was really Delta, American, and United. Not because they wanted this, but it actually, from an ROI standpoint, was huge. And then it eventually moved to corporate pilots. It eventually moved to airports. It eventually moved to health clubs. And some of you might have these at home, but it still hasn't really built out to Main Street yet. But there's about 5 different segments that they basically dominate with the Philips products. And so I'm pretty proud of the fact that they didn't do a spray and pray. What would have happened if you took it from a $3,000 price point down to a $2,400 price point, right, in that depth of rectangle here? Nothing would have happened. But they put focus in, they put whole product in, they put training in. And so that was kind of a cool example of a fairly complex product brought to a mainstream audience in about a 4-year period, something like that. So anyway, that's one example. But fun stuff. Thank you for all your time here this evening. We'll stay here as a small group afterwards, and anybody who has to go, please head out. I know you've got family obligations as well. So thanks again, and good luck to you. Thanks.